I'm in a season right now where I feel as though I've mismanaged some things. And God, I have messed it up. You have given me such great blessings, and I totally made a mess of it.
Welcome to the Christ Centered Stewardship podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino Villa. Christ Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino Villa.
Good morning, Maria. We have been in this kind of like this mini series of episodes where we've been talking about the economy and how people respond as things seem to get tighter and tighter. We're experiencing increases in the cost of goods and services. Inflation is still rearing its head left and right. We got everything that's going on with oil, and things just seem to be getting tighter. And we talked about how as things get tighter, it can throw some people into a panic and what that looks like. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Last week, we talked about how it can drive some people into avoidance. Mm-hmm. And today we want to talk about how that same tightening and that same pressure can lead some people into this behavior of control. And on the surface, how control sounds like a good thing. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to gain control. But it's not always a healthy response to pressure. So that's what we want to talk about today.
Well, this is great, and I'm here for it. Love it.
So let's start there. When you hear the word control, a lot of people would say, okay, that's a good thing. Like I'm finally like regaining control, or I'm getting control. But we're saying caution. Control's not always a healthy, helpful thing. What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, I think that the idea of self-control is actually a really positive thing. But what we're talking about here is controlling the situation at hand. And there's this sense, Nino, that if I could just take back control of everything, then I can predict what's going to happen, and I can figure it out, and then I can maybe even stop something bad from happening or make something good happen. And I think the problem there is that we don't really have that control. We have usurped that in our own minds from our Creator, and we need to be able to give that back to Him. And so I think that's one of the things that I think when I hear those words, like trying to take back control and just getting really, really in the weeds with that.
As you're sharing that, I'm thinking about a couple of different times throughout my life where maybe there was a transition in job, and so the money situation was uncertain. I remember when my wife and we were dating at the time. We moved from Las Vegas to Phoenix, and there was a period of time, 2-3 months, where I was working, but money was definitely tight. And so here I am trying to control every financial decision, and it led to arguments and disagreements and just a lot of frustration. And as I'm thinking about that, as you're sharing about like we're trying to take control, how that affects the peace that we are promised from our Creator. Like we are not supposed to worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything, thanking God for what He has done and asking Him for what we need. And then we will experience the peace that surpasses all understanding. Well, when I'm trying to control things, I'm not at peace.
Right. Yeah. I think sometimes what we do is we over restrict. As you're talking, I remember, oh yeah, one of the things that my husband, it just drove him crazy when we quote unquote took back control, was that we would restrict everything. It was like we weren't allowed to go here, we weren't allowed to do this, and it just it swung the pendulum so far the opposite direction, that it created it created angst more than peace, for sure. And also, I think gave more fodder for us to fight more often, because what you have to do then is, if you're restricting everything, then you're not really deciding how to make decisions based on your values, based on things that are important to me, important to him, and then important to us as a couple. And the whole family, because we have 4 children as well. And so I think that when we swing that pendulum too far the other way, we think that we are getting control back, but we're really not. We're just like strangling any sense of real movement, and that's not good either.
So I think the question starts to become, okay, but things are getting tight and something has to give. Something needs to change. We can't necessarily keep doing what we're doing because there are limited resources. I think about one of our values, stewardship over ownership. So if I'm in this season where things are tightening up, like, what is the best path forward? How do I steward what we have versus feeling like an owner who needs to control every last little decision? How do I find a happy balance?
Well, I say the first thing we do is go to prayer. We need to hear God's voice in our situation and figure out what are we supposed to be doing with this? Like, Lord, this is all yours. I'm giving it back to you. What do I do with it? You've given it to me to steward, but I don't know where to go. And I think sometimes too, we have to have a contrite heart. We have to realize that part of the reason we're in the situation that we're in is because we've made some stupid decisions. Like, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to say that and to recognize that we know part of the reason we're in the spot we're in is because we did have control. We took that back from our creator. We said, no, this is mine. I'm going to do this and I'm going to make the decisions. And we messed it up. And I mean, we're just following our ancestors, like and Adam and Eve in the garden. They messed it up too. So it's not like this is new. It's just there's that recognition of, okay, so I tried to do it and I didn't do it super well. I mean, I think of my kids when it comes to this, as they're growing. And I know your kids are, teenage to preteen. Mine are spread throughout, like, it feels like the entire, gamut. But from littles to now young adults. And there are moments in every one of their lives where we try to give them a little bit of that control, like taken away from the parental control. And I'm kind of putting that in your hands. And as well as I do, that as we do that, they're going to screw up, because that's what we do. We think, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to, then they sometimes, especially the young adults, get a little too big for their britches, and they think, oh, well, I know this, and they don't. They don't know, but they have such confidence in their knowledge. It's almost funny. And I wonder, how often does God just shake his head at us and know, oh, they have such confidence in their knowledge. And it's so far off base. But anyway, I don't even know what you had asked that got me there. But I do know that as we start to, you asked how we do it. And I think as we start to go back to prayer and say, how do I steward this well? That is a very, very important first step.
We talked about it a week or two ago, about how we make decisions and there are consequences, whether good consequences and so like a blessing, or sometimes negative consequences, like you did something foolish and now you're just suffering the consequences of your foolishness. But having that contrite heart is so important, just to be able to say, you know what, I messed up. And God's here for it. He's here to say, like, okay, that's a humble heart that I can use. And now we're going to learn from our mistakes. That's what we want for our children, right? I think about my children. I know they're going to make mistakes. I wish they didn't, but they're not perfect. I'm not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. So the lesson, the mantra has always been, what can you learn from the mistake so that you grow, and in hopes that you don't make the same mistake over and over and over again. And so there's grace there. So give yourself some grace, but turn to the Creator with that contrite heart and just say, okay, I messed it up. And I've been doing that. I'm in a season right now where I'm like, I feel as though I've mismanaged some things. And I'm all like, God, I have messed it up. You have given me such great blessings, and I totally made a mess of it.
So what I hear you saying is that you've made some mistakes. You're ready to give that back to God, and what I hear in there is that taking back that control is where that self-control comes in. So I think this is where the word can be used in a very good way, and then in more of a pejorative way. But this is one where if we are taking back some self-control, we're controlling ourselves and our ability to do things, and then we take that and we say, Lord, this is all back to you. And I just need help on the day-to-day in making sure that I stay in your will. And this is where I think, we can actually look back at our core values and say, obedience to God's will is one of those core values that we have. And then I also think that when we are stuck in, because it's going to feel mundane. There are times, let's get real, that it's going to feel mundane. And we have to go, how do we break that feeling of being in the mundane? And I say gratitude every single time is the way to break that. And so if we can learn how to be content in what we're being asked to do, what God's will for us is, even when we don't understand it, because there are so many times that I just don't understand. Like, Lord, why are you having me do this? What is the purpose of this thing that I'm going through? And if I struggle with that, I can find myself getting into resentment, and I want to avoid resentment and really kind of bask in contentment instead. And I think the easiest way to do that is just recognizing what are the things that I'm blessed with, and to really be grateful for those things, even grateful for the trials, grateful for the things that don't feel like blessings in the moment, but to just understand, like, God will make good of this thing. And so I need to be okay with where we are and be grateful for it in the moment.
I believe we talked a little bit about discipline doesn't feel good at the moment, but it yields a harvest of righteousness. And so as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about how when we're in those moments of uncertainty, why is this happening? And to your point, avoiding resentment, staying in gratitude, but also seeking, Lord, how is it that you want me to grow in this season? Mm-hmm. What are you trying to teach me? I said a moment ago, mistakes are an opportunity to learn. As somebody with an adult education background, I actually encourage mistakes. I like to build safe-to-fail environments for people who are learning how to do their job so that they can fail, because making a mistake is an incredible learning opportunity. And if we saw it as that, if we saw our struggles and our hardships as an opportunity for our character to grow, which is what the word says. It says trials and tribulations are an opportunity for your character to grow. Then ask, how does my character need to grow in this season? And that's exactly what I've been asking the Lord in my season, where, okay, I'm recognizing I mismanaged. I did things in my own will and not in your will. And how would you like me to grow? What are the lessons that I need to learn so that I don't end up just repeating the same mistakes over and over again?
Yeah, I love it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about our Ask the Coaches question. It brought up the word control, but in a completely different way, and I thought it would be fun to kind of unpack this.
Okay.
So, Mary Lynn post, is the tipping culture out of control?
Okay. I can't wait to lean into this one.
Yeah.
Go on.
So the rest of her post just says, today I had my nails filed for a long overdue pedicure tipped. Much needed haircut and highlights. tipped. My friend's house cleaner was angry because my friend left her a $10 tip plus the $40 an hour she also pays for her cleaning. Allow me to add that I do tip, but it has gotten out of control. So I thought it would just be fun to maybe have a conversation about tipping etiquette in the United States, because I'm uncultured. So if you're listening abroad, I'm sorry, this might not pertain to you. But here in the United States, tipping, I do believe, my personal opinion, has also gotten out of control. I will add, I love to be a generous tipper. So like at a sit-down restaurant, in a what I would consider a normal setting, but I also waited tables, right? So I know what it's like to be paid less than minimum wage per hour, and you're relying on tips to make up that difference. So when I sit down at a restaurant with the family, I want to be a generous tipper and giver in that scenario. Mm-hmm. But when I go to a coffee shop and all you've done is whipped up a coffee for me, and I'm sorry if all you've done is...
Yeah, because you didn't do it for yourself, sir.
that is very true. So I figure like this is a good conversation to have, because at the end of the day, it's going to depend on the person and how they feel. But we're talking about an economy that feels like it's tightening, and people may want to still enjoy their little treats like a coffee, but they also may want to reduce the cost of that by avoiding the pressured tip, or the seemingly... There seems to be pressure to tip more and more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think that pressure actually comes from an expectation, or at least it's put out as an expectation. And I'm actually happy to have this conversation with you. I do agree that things are out of control. The way that I look at it is that I like to look back at the original, purpose for something. And as you stated, there used to be a time when, you get paid a lot less than minimum wage and you were relying on tips. And I know that there are still certain workers in certain industries that is still the case. I don't know exactly how much less than minimum wage. Minimum wage itself has gotten completely out of control, but that is a topic for a completely other day. But I do know that there are many people who are getting paid minimum wage or more who are also sticking a tip jar outside of wherever you are, and that kind of thing. And I chuckled when it says that my friend's house cleaner was angry because my friend left her a $10 tip plus the $40 an hour she already pays her for cleaning. And that made me chuckle, because it's interesting to me that someone would be angry over a $10 tip. I'm guessing what that means is that she was angry that it wasn't more.
Yep, I assume the same.
And I'm laughing at that, because one of my things is, if you are a sole proprietor and you are charging an amount of money per hour that is a fair wage, like say $40 per hour, then a tip really is not something that should be expected just because of an industry that you're in. That to me feels like entitlement, and entitlement happens to be something that I'm actually repulsed by. It could be entitlement from, somebody in an industry. It could be from my own children. It could be from my own spirit. If I'm in a place where I'm feeling entitled to something, I have to really take a step back and go, hey, Maria, that's not okay. Like, you're not entitled to that thing. And it just, that drives me a little bit crazy. So I like to use tipping to what it was originally for, to let somebody know, wow, you did an exceptionally good job. And I feel well taken care of, and you went above and beyond, and I want to honor that with a monetary tip. That's that for me, that's one of the things that I like to use as a gauge. So if somebody is cleaning a hotel room, maybe leaving a tip there if they do a really good job. But oftentimes you don't know that they're doing a good job because a lot of times they don't even come in anymore until it's all over. Right?
Right.
So I think it becomes very difficult to know. But for me, it's one of did you do a good job, and are you feeling entitled to that thing? And, I mean, I'll share this. I actually I'm part of a massage, monthly massage program. But it is not one of the ones with a chain. It's with somebody who does this outside of their home, and it's reasonably priced, like compared to a lot of the other chains out there. But it's still per hour a decent amount of money. I think I pay $70 per month, but it's 1 hour massage, right? So $70 per hour is a decent amount. I have never felt obligated to tip on top of that amount. Having said that, there have been several times, maybe every, second or third month or whatever, that I'm like, you know what, that was exceptionally well, or Christmas is coming and I want to give, an extra $30, $40. I will like to use it that way so that A, it's not expected on their end, and it becomes a surprise for them when they get it, and B, I know that they're getting, even when you account for cost of all of the materials and stuff, they're still getting a decent dollar per hour, and I'm using air quotes here on purpose, amount for their service. And so when I am able to tip more, they're very grateful for that. And again, they don't change their service based on whether or not they're getting something. Now that would be different if I was in one of the not higher end, but one of the chain places. Even if I'm paying $100 an hour for my massage, I know that person working isn't getting that money. And then I feel more inclined to tip them specifically because they're not getting that full amount. Does that make sense?
It does. Scenario? It makes complete sense. And I'm glad that you brought it up because I actually kind of want to talk about maybe like different industries. For instance, my wife's been with the same hairdresser for a while. And when she first started, this young lady had rented a room in like a bigger area. So it's her own spot. It's her own place. And whatever she was charging is what she was charging. And so my wife would ask, like, do I tip? And what do I tip? Because she's providing the service and it's her business. Now that's changed. She has now joined a hair salon. So now to your point, there's like the obligation factor feels like it has risen because she's not collecting that entire fee. So
right.
Now it's like, okay, fee plus tip. But when she was on her own, same thing with like our dog groomer. Our dog groomer does it from her home. We take our dogs to this woman's house. She grooms them there. And my wife's always like, do I tip her? And I'm like, well, it's her own business. Look, we provide a service.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the 13 years I've been financial coaching, I've never once received nor expected to receive a tip. I'm providing a service. I'm doing that independently or now as a partnership. But that's just, it is what it is. I don't expect a tip above and beyond. So I think the tipping etiquette, like if you were writing a book on this, I think it's really convoluted nowadays rather than being kind of clear cut. Like, here's when you do, here's when you don't.
Yeah, I would like to look at it as a reward for fantastic service. Like, and you want it to be coming from a heart of gratitude, and that's how it will then be received. And so those are my two very simple. My book would be very, very short and boring to read.
I think our listeners would appreciate that.
But my daughter, she just started working for a food joint, and they get to share quote unquote tips that are thrown into the bucket. And I told her, I said, I hope that you don't have an expectation of any of that. And she said, oh no, I don't have, I don't count on any of it. But I said, I am curious to know, because she works at a place that actually costs a lot of money. And I said, I'm curious to know how many people actually throw more in, just because like this poster said, it's almost like a sense of obligation at this point, and there's pressure to do that. And so I'll keep an eye on it and maybe report back to you, as to how, like, what percentage of people throw extra money in there. But I do agree that it has gotten a little bit out of control.
So the practical side of me wants to jump in and say, to your point, let it be that when you, listener, decide to tip, a couple of things happen. One, God's word tells us that we should be cheerful givers and not to give out of obligation or compulsion. Mm-hmm. So let that guide you. Mm-hmm. And then I love yours. Let it be a reward for excellent service, because I'll share this too, just to kind of round it out. Like, yes, I waited tables, so I know what it's like to kind of rely on tips. My wife was a barista at Starbucks, and it was hourly wage was higher than minimum wage, so the tips were just kind of gravy and not an expectation, but they were nice to have. Like, when she was doing that, it was nice to have some extra coming in. But it got me thinking about how many times do you tip at Domino's? Like, maybe a driver if they're driving it, but like, who goes inside, gets a pizza, and tips? And when you mentioned earlier wanting to maybe around Christmas time offer like a bonus, like, I love going into places like Dunkin' Donuts or Domino's, where, good or bad, we are regulars, we are known by name, and drop off a Christmas card with a tip for the crew on that particular day at that particular time as a form of gratitude. Like, we appreciate you guys, and we appreciate that when we come in, you know us by name. You can expect to see us at 6:15 on a Thursday evening, like clockwork. It is crazy.
Oh,
so
goodness.
Be a cheerful giver, and give not because you're obligated or feel compelled to, but because you want to.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you before we wrap up, Nino, to share real quick. I know that you have a certain desire, I guess, to, like, this is something you're working on right now. You and your family, if I feel like you've told me this story once, that you and your family intentionally, when you go out to dine, that you want to go above and beyond what would be expected as a tip. Could you just share real quick for our listeners what you do and how you got to the point that this was a desire for your family?
Oh, that's a good question. It starts with wanting to be a blessing. I feel like I have been blessed, so I want to be a blessing. It started with wanting to tip more graciously when somebody was just outstanding, and communicate. It's a way to communicate our appreciation and that sort of thing. But that actually grew into, it doesn't matter how well somebody performs, we are going to bless them and communicate our appreciation for them, regardless of their attitude, regardless of their performance. It is just a decision that we've made, not necessarily for the person, but to honor God. We just want to be an extension of the Lord's grace and the Lord's patience and the Lord's kindness. So now we tip above and beyond to communicate you are seen, you are known, you are appreciated, and it wasn't based on your performance.
And how are you able to communicate that to somebody? Is it just through the number that they receive, or how do they know that it's not because they performed really well?
Sometimes it is a conversation with them. Sometimes it's a note left on the on the receipt. We will leave scriptures with the tip and whatnot. So we find, like, we'll use God's word to communicate to them, and then sometimes it's just a conversation with the person, letting them know that we appreciated them. Sometimes it is just the number. Like, I had a guy come back to me once. Me and two guys were sitting down at IHOP, and my buddy was in town picking up his son, and he does that. That's long distance. So he flies in, he hangs out. Well, while we were hanging out, we hung out at this IHOP for like 3 hours. We were playing cards. Nobody else is in there. So when we go to close out, I provided a very generous tip, and the guy came over and he's all like, "Thank you so much." And like, "Look, man, like, don't thank me. You know, I've been blessed. I just want to, share the blessing," that sort of thing. And so a conversation ensues from that. So sometimes you get their attention that way, but since then I've been really mindful about, like, let's leave scripture so that and I can't, it's funny, I do this and I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically the scripture I leave says something like, if you're feeling grateful, thank the Lord, for he's the one that has provided. And so it's a way to point people to our Creator and his provisions.
I really appreciate the intentionality in that, and that it's perfect way to wrap up what we're talking about today, because that is one of the things that we preach here, is being intentional with your decisions, having a purpose behind it, and not just randomly going with the flow because that's what everybody else is doing.
So it sounds like the challenge for this week is to be intentional in your giving and not giving out of obligation or compulsion.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.